Welcome to Hip Hop Now Podcast. If you're from the future, you know what to do. Get your ass out of here. Don't disrespect the legend. Hip hop is here to stay. Let's get right into the business. What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is Hip Hop Now Podcast, a podcast specifically designed to keep you caught up on all things hip hop, music, and culture that happened throughout the week. Big shout out to the Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/hiphopnow. And if you would like to join the illustrious people who are now listed below on the, if you watch it on video, below on the ticker, these are past and present supporters of the podcast over at patreon.com/hiphopnow. And if you would like to learn more about that, I put the link in the description of this episode. Big shout out to hiphopdx.com, allhiphop.com, the Source magazine, and a couple of places where I get some of these stories from. Let's get right into the business. Unless you've been living a lifetime under a hip hop rock, you have heard the term stan. It's a term used to describe fanatics, not fans, but crazy people, right? You love your artist so much, you defend them like you know them. You defend them like you own a payroll. You're kind of crazy with it. You're not just a fan. You don't just enjoy the music. You don't just relate to them. You're crazy and you probably want to kill them. Now, the reason why I went that far is because if you've been living under a hip hop rock, stan is a term that comes from the popular Eminem song Stan, which was about a fan named Stan who was obsessed with him, with Eminem, and wrote him letters and got to the point where he was such a fanatic and looked into Eminem's music so deeply that he eventually, and I'm not going to spoil it, but it just didn't end well for him. That after that song, that name was what people refer to when there's overzealous fans, right? Now, obviously, most fans that you would call a stan, we got a lot of bars today, fan and stan a lot. But most fans that you refer to as that, they're just overzealous, right? They just say some things that most fans don't, right? Like, hey, Jay-Z's better than Michael Jackson. No, he's not. But maybe you love Jay-Z so much that you ignore the accomplishments of Michael Jackson. Maybe. I don't know. And for some people, maybe that's debatable. But that's an example. But obviously, it goes on and on. For those that already are aware, I'm explaining it for those who don't know. But considering how popular the word or the term stan is in hip hop, and it's kind of taken on a life of its own, Eminem is exploring world of super fandom in a new Stans documentary. This is coming from hiphopdx.com. I'm going to read real quick. They got it from Variety. On Wednesday, February 14th, Variety reported that the Detroit MC is set to co-produce a documentary titled Stans, which is a reference to his fictional song about a devotee of music who ends up, for those who never heard the song, I'm not going to spoil it, but he ends up killing himself and his girlfriend. You should check it out. Very dope song. One of the best songs in hip hop history. After Eminem doesn't respond to his letters, that's the key, right? Stan has since become a recognized term, both noun and verb, used to convey obsession, typically for artists and celebrities. So this is going to be released later this year via Shady Films. And let's see what the director, Stephen Leckart, said, describes it as revealing, edgy, and disarmingly personal journey into the world of super fandom, told through the lens of one of the world's most iconic and enduring artists, Eminem, and the fans that worship him. So, where this is going to essentially focus on Eminem stance, right? Because that's typically like overzealous, obsessed Eminem fans are referred to as stans, but they kind of do that with everybody. Um, they're going to explore that part of it as it relates to Eminem, but also just as it relates in general to artists. I like this. I think honestly, this would have been dope for 50 years of hip hop, but there was a ton of things. And who's just, I mean, I'm not going to say, hey, all right, that's it. No more hip hop documentaries because 50 years of hip hop has passed. But I don't think there's ever been a documentary that I'm not aware of that would concentrate on terms in hip hop, like extremely popular terms that have become a part of hip hop culture and lingo, right? Stan has, right? I remember using that as a validation for Eminem's impact because there's so many dudes that don't listen to Eminem that use Stan when they're referring to not Eminem fans, but just any obsessed fans. Another term that kind of took on some of that, maybe not as popular, but a lot of people to this day, including rappers, still mention it. Ether. I remember that was just the whole definition was just like, you know, I got that ether for you. And usually that means, and it says, whatever Rick Ross says, I don't care what he says, it usually means you're going to get smoked in this battle, you know, or whatever the competition is. And obviously, that's referring to the Nas diss record towards Jay-Z back in 2001 on his birthday. Jay-Z's birthday, that is. Ether, right? It was so impactful in the hip hop game that it became a slang word used or a term used for annihilation in hip hop. Hey, these are the facts. This is the history, fam. What you want me to do? So, I think I'll check that out when it drops. I mean, I'm behind, y'all. I am behind on hip hop docs. At some point, I'm just gonna pick a day and I'm just gonna binge them because I didn't see Run DMC yet. I didn't see Drez from Black Sheep joint yet. I still ain't see the Biz Markie joint. There's a lot. I did see Little Brother, and if you want to know my feelings on that, just check out my videos. I have a episode actually dedicated to reviewing that documentary. So I'm going to do more because there are plenty of people like me who either didn't know some of these documentaries existed or never got the chance to watch them. And you know, time is money, so you got to take the time. But maybe I'll start to do that, like beginning in March. I'll watch one or two of them and then put out a full episode reviewing them, right? Last week, if you're from the future, you know what to do. Get on out of here. Okay, get on up out of here. Kanye West released his collaborative album with Ty Dolla $ign entitled Vultures Part 1. This is part 1 of 3 projects to come. And let me say this. At first, I didn't even know it was out, which makes sense because typically how you know some of these projects are released is the promotions. It's the build up to it. You know, you see it everywhere. You see a video, you see it being promoted everywhere. Well, one of the reasons why it just wasn't in your face the way it would have been in the past with past Kanye projects is just because he keep talking, right? He keeps saying things that anger people and especially anger people of power. And not saying that anybody blocked him or anything like that, but I could see it not being a priority to promote it. Whether it's him and his team not taking the efforts to promote it, even though they did the Super Bowl thing, which was low budget, but it worked out for them financially. Um, before I get into the album, and I'm gonna be brief, let me just say this first because of who I mentioned, right? Kanye West has said a lot of things that I do not agree with, right? It doesn't matter if you're talking about black folk, men, women, or Jews. It doesn't matter. I don't agree with a lot of stuff he said. And I remember when he dropped that one album with the mountain in the background. This is when he had the Magna hat on and Trump was in office and he was Trump, Trump, Trump. And I remember I was curious to hear what it sounded like because, I do a news podcast. So I figured, maybe I'll talk about it. There's some people who are curious, maybe not curious enough to press play, but are curious. And I remember with that album, I was like, man, musically, this album is dope, but lyrically, it is not. And a lot of it had to do with what he was saying, right? A lot of what he was saying on, news outlets and all of that about Trump and society and black folk and all of that was in his lyrics. So it's tough to like really get into something if you don't agree or relate, right? That's what Vultures is. It is a very complicated situation. Uh, I remember the day it came out, I had it in the queue to listen to. I went to the liquor store. Don't worry, I ain't an alcoholic or nothing like that. I just needed some brew for the Super Bowl, right? And while I'm in there, a couple of the young cats that worked there were having a debate about Kanye West. And I knew it was off the strength of the new music that was out. And they were all kind of conflicted, right? Some agreed with things I'm saying, and then there were others who were making, and he was black, who were kind of making excuses for what Kanye was saying, even about slavery being a choice. I couldn't believe what I was listening to, but I do a hip hop news podcast, so I just wanted to listen. I didn't want to interfere. I wanted to hear it play out since they chose to speak freely in the aisle where I'm trying to get the brew. And I just remember thinking, like, wow, this is why he's still a draw. Because there's a lot of people who have no problem with what he's saying, not necessarily because they totally agree, but because they dig that he's free to say what he wants. There's a generation that don't care about any other principles and what came before and you need to have a job for this. They do not care. They want to be free and they see him as that. Now let's just get to the bottom of it right before I get into this album. He obviously and admittedly in some cases has mental issues, but I think he needs more help. And I think a lot of people are enabling him in some ways. And I think the success tells him he's doing the right thing, even if it's the craziest marketing risk you could ever take with your life and career, he will do it. Because Kanye, before MAGA hats, before what he said about black folks and Jews, before his mother's passing, saw that if he did something to get people's attention, they would all pay attention to him, and a lot of people would check it out or buy it. And he's been doing it with every album ever since. I think this started with, I want to say, Graduation, with the him versus 50 Cent thing. And from there on, you got the Taylor Swift moment. You got everything. George Bush don't like black folk. I think that was a little bit earlier, but you know what I mean? Like it was just kind of like he was going to say what he wanted to say no matter what the subject was. And that's what he's doing now. And that's what he's doing on Vultures 1. Now, is it just littered with that? No. A lot of it is the Kanye a lot of it, right? A lot of what he's saying, like, you can't really zero in on um, him saying something about a woman. Oh, he's a womanizer. He been saying that, right? When you liked him. But then there are things he says that are like the clips you hear of him talking. And you're like, and he's like doubling down on it. And it's like, now the album is 16 tracks. It's about an hour in length. It is a quick listen, if you ask me. I probably, honestly, only skipped about 2 or 3 joints, and that had more to do with the features than him, where it just didn't sound good. But musically, Kanye West, if not for nothing, he can still produce. I hate to say it to y'all who don't want him to have anything left. He can still produce. He can produce for these young cats, and he can produce well, as we saw with some of the Pusha T stuff, for the boom bap heads. He still has that. Now, obviously, you know, he's always had help with production, and he also raps over other people's production. So it's not solely a Kanye West thing. But nevertheless, I think with this album, if Kanye had never said any of the things, MAGA hat, slavery was a choice, things he says about Jews, and the subject matter was, I don't know, the opposite, right? In support of, right? Pro-black, pro-Jews, and all of that, right? Again, they're not whole songs about this stuff. It's just lines that he has sprinkled throughout the project. I think people would love this album. Now, when I say that, and this is kind of how I review things, I will say, if you're a Kanye West fan from the past and you haven't liked anything since My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, this ain't for you. If you've liked most of what Kanye's done, including a couple of albums like Yeezus or whatever, and 808s, you might like this album musically. If you have written him off because of everything he said and how out of control he is, and you know, the fact that you think he needs help and you don't want to enable as far as streams and record sales, this is not for you. And if you're a boom bap cat, it's not for you either. This is not for you. Do I like it? Is it one of the best of the year? No. Nah. I think it's too difficult to judge Kanye West albums without putting them up against his previous work. And if your motivation is to walk your wife around butt naked while you got a mask on with big boots and just say things to incite people and then turn around and apologize and turn around and have it come out with it in your lyrics, like it's just as messy as his life seems. So there you have it. And lastly, speaking of Kanye and artists and artistry, one question that arises via situation like R. Kelly or Rick Ross, and most recently, Freddie Gibbs. Can you separate the art from the artist? To me, you can, but it's complicated. Now, examples. I think personally that if you are into the music so much that the music is this separate thing for you, then you can separate them. But I think if what that artist does outside of their music is in the lyrics, then you can't separate it because they're rapping about it, because they're singing about it. And that's one of the reasons, like, I was a huge R. Kelly fan. When I tell you huge, I mean every album, every remix, an unreleased album. Like, I had all of this just in my catalog and I would listen to it frequently. And at some point, I couldn't separate the artist from the art once it was just complete fact of who he was, and it was all in the music. Some of my favorite records are now tainted because they were about situations that would, landed him in jail. I just talked about Kanye and his situation. It's easy to separate it if the music is about different subject matter. But the artist puts whatever he talks about that's controversial in his music to justify it. And it becomes difficult to separate the artist from the art. Now, some can still do that because they don't see it as being such, even though he's saying the same thing in the music. But then there's a whole other category of separating art from the artist. And with this example, I could easily separate the two because I think it comes down to, do you really care? Right? Rick Ross, for the longest time, he talked about, drug. His name is patterned after a notorious drug dealer, Freeway Ricky Ross, even almost the look with the beard. And, that's coke rhymes and drugs and blah, blah, blah. And then people came to find out that he was a correctional officer. Now, I don't know about you, but some COs, they may have a badge, they ain't good. You know what I'm saying? And no one knows if that's what he was doing or whatever. But at the time, he denied it because it went against all the things he talked about in his record. Now, well, let me just say, with the Rick Ross thing, I did not care. You know why? Because this is the difference. I can separate him from what else he used to do. Like if he worked in Burger King, I'm not gonna be like, you worked in Burger King, you ain't a boss. To me, hip hop is all about the different genres, the different types of rappers, the different types of subject matter. It's all entertainment. I see it no different from me picking up Grand Theft Auto or the latest Super Mario game, right? I'm a grown man. I could choose between the two. Both are not real. That's how I look at it. So when Rick Ross came out, everything he was saying, I was like, yo, he really doing that? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't care. Because I never looked at rappers, whether they're gangster rap or whatever, as always saying what they did was a thing of reality. And if as many rappers that talk about drugs and guns and cases and murders and stuff like that, which I look at as being equivalent to action movies or books, or mafia movies or books with the same subject matter, no one would have to go and do these crimes in order to talk about it, right? Robert De Niro doesn't have to be a mob boss in order to play one. He's an actor. Rappers, to me, are storytellers, right? They could be telling their story from the past. They could be telling a man's story. They could be telling a bunch of stories. They can be influenced by stories from other mediums. That's how I looked at it with Rick Ross. The music was good. I like what I heard. I did not care that he was Officer Ricky. It was funny, but at the end of the day, did Rick Ross really need to be a drug kingpin in order for you to like his music? I don't think so. I think it would have been more complicated if he really was, right? Because for one, you're going to jail now. And two, now people have to think, well, that's not something to brag about, right? But if it's all in the vein of entertainment and you don't look at movies like Goodfellas and Scarface and all of that as being entertainment also, I mean, what are we really talking about? Can't be good for them and not for hip hop. Now, most recently, talk about separating Freddie Gibbs. Freddie Gibbs too, right? Now he had a whole bunch of things happen, all in succession, right? He got jumped by presumably, allegedly, Benny the Butcher's Peoples. And his girlfriend at the time was pregnant, and he was trying to look the other way or go the other way, say it wasn't his, whatever. And she exposed him, right? Pictures came out. One picture came out. I'm not even going to describe it. You can just Google it yourself. Freddie Gibbs and a couple of keywords, and you'll find what was out there, right? Hashtag Spready Gibbs, if you know what I mean. But in hip hop, that's all kinds of L's. Like 50 years of hip hop, that's all kinds of L's. There was a point in time where if that happened to anybody, they're done. They're finished. No one's going to work with them, nothing. Now, in a lot of ways, these were private photos. This wasn't nothing he did publicly. This is something he said to her. And because of the situation, now he's been exposed. Apparently, something else came out recently, and he laughs at it. And I think, and he's also featured on Kanye West's album. When I hear new verses from him, I don't even care. I don't even care. Because the first time I pressed play on Freddie Gibbs, it never crossed my mind to be like, yo, I wonder if he be taking pictures of himself and sending them to broads. Man, I don't care. As long as you're not doing nothing crazy, right? Like messing with underage women, right? I know he had the alleged rape charge, I think, when he was like overseas or something like that a couple years back. Nothing ever came of that, so I don't know, and I can't just assume because somebody accused you that you're guilty. I'm just sorry, you just can't, right? You're guilty, you know. But nevertheless, this stuff that's happening, to be honest, it's funny. It's still an L, but his music is dope, and it's really nothing that I mean, unless you start rapping about it all crazy, maybe, but that's probably a skip. So it does not bother me to have these things happen. Now I can't listen to your music no more. You out here looking crazy. Listening to Freddie Gibbs' music won't have no positive or negative impact on me at all. And I feel like a lot of insecurity comes into play when people judge like that. And a lot of now don't get me wrong, I ain't saying I want to get caught out there like that, because it's got to be embarrassing. But if he's taking it well, why do you care? As long as the music is dope, as long as the music is focused like it's always been, who cares? Some people can't separate the artist from the art. And I get it. I mean, because there are people who want you to at least live or be what you rap about in some ways. And if you're calling yourself a pimp, then they look at it like a pimp wouldn't do that, and I can't listen to your music. Again, like I said earlier, hip hop is entertainment. I see it no different as any other form of entertainment that chooses to have different subject matter and it's not all positive. You just make a choice whether you want to hear it or not. But I think in certain instances, can I judge an artist strictly on his art, or does his or her life have to play a role basically in whether or not you like it, right? We talked about Megan Thee Stallion and Nicki Minaj and the Megan's Law line. And for a long time, I used to feel some kind of way about Nicki. Like, yo, you kind of like supporting these. I get it. He's your husband and your baby father, and that's your brother. But what's good with the pedophiles, right? Like, why is that a trend, right? Like, I get the details of it, but why is that a trend that surrounds you that you kind of defend? But some people still press play. People still listen. there's more people who support her than not. And I think the same goes for Rick Ross. Same goes for Kanye. R. Kelly might be the only one, but he's locked up, found guilty. But he might be the only one where the majority rules and they do not rule in his favor because of his actions. What do you think? Do you think you can separate the artist from the art, right? Kanye's situation versus Freddie Gibbs' situation. Does either matter to you? Does it matter if it's in the music? Does it bother you? Leave your comments in the comment section below. You can follow me on social media at Vegas World INC and check out the audio version. If you don't always have time to watch the video, it's available on all platforms. And check out my new series exclusively on YouTube called Tale of the Tapes, where I pull a cassette out of my garage and talk about it for like 2 minutes or so. And I got a lot of joints from early 90s. I didn't realize I had that many cassettes still in my garage, but it's a dope series and we got 12 joints. A few have released now, more to come all the way into March. Until next time, y'all, I'm not a critic, I'm a fan. Peace.